the small town of Millbrook seemed like the perfect fresh start for Rachel and her 14-year-old daughter Mira. After the divorce, Rachel desperately needed distance from her old life, and the quaint Victorian house on Elm Street appeared to be exactly what they needed. The rent was surprisingly affordable, which should have been their first warning sign. Mira had always been a quiet, introspective girl, but the move had made her even more withdrawn. She spent most of her time in her new bedroom on the second floor, reading or sketching in her journal. Rachel attributed this to typical teenage adjustment issues and the trauma of her parents' bitter separation. The house itself was beautiful, but carried an inexplicable heaviness. Built in 1892, it had been empty for nearly 3 years before they moved in. The previous tenants had left abruptly, according to their nosy neighbour Mrs. Thompson, though she wouldn't elaborate on why. The wallpaper was slightly faded, and the hardwood floors creaked with every step, but Rachel found these imperfections charming rather than concerning. During their first week, small things began happening that they initially dismissed as settling into a new environment. Books would be found in different rooms than where they'd been left. The temperature in Mira's bedroom seemed consistently colder than the rest of the house, despite the heating vents working properly. Kitchen cabinet doors would be discovered standing open in the morning, though both women were certain they'd been closed the night before. Mira was the first to sense something genuinely wrong. She would lie in bed at night, listening to what sounded like footsteps in the hallway outside her door. When she finally worked up the courage to investigate, she'd find the corridor empty and silent. She mentioned this to her mother, who suggested it might be the house settling or perhaps mice in the walls. By the second week, the incidents escalated from peculiar to genuinely disturbing. Mira woke up one morning to find her bedroom furniture rearranged. Her desk had been moved to the opposite wall, and her bookshelf now blocked the closet door. When she called for her mother, Rachel found the scene impossible to explain. There was no way a 14-year-old girl could have moved such heavy furniture by herself, especially without making enough noise to wake her mother in the next room. Rachel began questioning her own memory. Had the furniture always been arranged this way? The stress of the divorce and the move was affecting her more than she wanted to admit. But Mira was that someone or something had moved everything during the night. The girl's eyes held a fear that Rachel had never seen before, not even during the worst fights between her parents. The next incident occurred during dinner on a Thursday evening. They were eating quietly when every cabinet door in the kitchen simultaneously swung open with a whoosh. Dishes rattled on their shelves, and the fluorescent light above them flickers before going out completely. In the sudden darkness, they heard what sounded like whoosh coming from the walls themselves. Rachel's hands shook as she fumbled for her phone's flashlight. When the beam cut through the darkness, they saw something that made them both freeze in shock. Every knife from the knife block was now embedded in the kitchen table, arranged in a perfect circle around where they had been sitting. Neither of them had moved. Neither of them had heard the knives being thrown. Mira started, "Ho!" Not the quiet tears of an upset teenager, but the raw, "Wah!" of someone who had seen something that shouldn't exist. Rachel pulled her daughter close, but she was shaking just as badly. The whoosh seeming to come from every direction at once, though they couldn't make out any words. When the lights suddenly came back on, the knives were gone, the cabinet doors were closed, everything appeared normal, except for the small circular marks in the wooden table where the blades had been embedded just moments before. Sleep became impossible after the kitchen incident. Mira refused to be alone in her room, and Rachel found herself checking and rechecking locks throughout the night. They had called the police, but Officer Martinez had looked at them with barely concealed skepticism when they described the floating knives. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder, and the story sounded like something out of a horror movie. Dr. Sarah Chen, the child psychologist Rachel consulted, suggested that Mira might be experiencing stress-induced hallucinations. Divorce can be particularly traumatic for teenagers, she explained. Sometimes the mind creates elaborate scenarios to cope with overwhelming emotions. But when Rachel mentioned that she had witnessed the same events, Dr. Chen's confident expression faltered slightly. 3 days later, the entity, for lack of a better word, made its presence known in the most terrifying way yet. Mira was sitting at her desk doing homework when her pencil suddenly snapped in half by itself. Then another pencil broke, and another, until every writing instrument in her room lay scattered in pieces across the floor. But that was just the beginning. As Mira stood frozen in shock, her bedroom door slammed shut with such force that the entire house shook. The temperature in the room plummeted so rapidly that her breath became visible in white puffs. And then, slowly but unmistakably, words began appearing on the steamed mirror of her attached bathroom. "Get out." The letters formed in what looked like condensation, but the mirror had been perfectly clear moments before. As Mira watched in horror, more words appeared below the first message, this time in what appeared to be a child's handwriting. "She doesn't belong here." Rachel heard her daughter's scream from downstairs and raced up to find Mira pounding on the bedroom door, which refused to open despite her desperate attempts. The handle turned freely, but some invisible force held the door firmly closed. Rachel threw her full weight against it, calling Mira's name, but nothing worked. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The door opened so abruptly that Rachel tumbled into the room. The temperature returned to normal, and the mirror showed no trace of the threatening messages. Only Mira's terrified face and the scattered pencil fragments remained as evidence of what had transpired. The next morning brought no relief. Rachel had barely slept, keeping vigil outside Mira's door throughout the night. Every creak of the old house made her jump. Every shadow seemed to move with malicious intent. When dawn finally broke, she made a decision that she hoped would bring them answers. Mrs. Thompson, their elderly neighbour, had lived on Elm Street for over 40 years. If anyone knew the history of their house, it would be her. Rachel found the woman tending to her rose garden, her weathered hands working methodically despite the early hour. "I wondered when you'd come asking," Mrs. Thompson said, without looking up from her flowers. Her voice carried a weight that suggested she'd been dreading this conversation. "That house has a troubled history, dear. The Hendersons lived there before you. Lovely family with 3 children. They lasted exactly 8 months. Rachel's stomach dropped. What happened to them? Mrs. Thompson finally straightened, her pale blue eyes meeting Rachel's with uncomfortable directness. Same things that are happening to you, I imagine. The youngest daughter, Emma, she was about your Mira's age. Started with small things, toys moving, cold spots, whispers in the walls. But it escalated significantly. The old woman's hands trembled slightly as she continued. Emma began speaking in voices that weren't her own, strange, unnatural sounds that no 14-year-old girl should be able to make. She would experience episodes during sleep, appearing to float above her bed while making those disturbing sounds. The family tried everything: doctors, specialists, even brought in some researchers from the university. Rachel felt her blood turn cold. What happened to Emma? She began having concerning episodes, Mrs. Thompson said quietly, glancing nervously toward Rachel's house. Said she was hearing voices that frightened her terribly. That's when the family left suddenly in the middle of the night. Haven't heard from them since. But why? Rachel asked desperately. What's causing this in that house? Mrs. Thompson's expression grew even more serious. Before it was the Henderson house, it belonged to the Clearys. Back in 1934, they had a daughter named Lucy, sweet little thing, about 7 years old. She had a tragic fall down the main staircase. The accident was fatal. The elderly woman paused, as if gathering courage for what came next. But here's the thing that most folks don't know. Lucy's passing wasn't quite what it seemed. There was an incident with her older brother during one of their childhood arguments. The family kept the details private, said it was simply a tragic accident. But Lucy, well, some say that when someone passes away under such circumstances, especially when That evening, armed with Mrs. Thompson's revelations, Rachel decided to research the house's history herself. She spent hours at the local library computer, digging through newspaper archives and property records. What she found made her blood run cold. The Clearys had indeed lost their daughter Lucy in 1934, but the newspaper report was suspiciously brief. 7-year-old Lucy Cleary died tragically in a fall down the stairs of the family home. Services will be held. Nothing more, no investigation mentioned, no questions asked. For a child's death, especially one involving stairs that should have triggered safety concerns, the lack of detail was telling. But Rachel found something else that made her hands shake as she read. Lucy Cleary had been described by neighbours as a difficult child who was jealous of attention given to her older brother. The same neighbour who gave this quote said Lucy had threatened to tell everyone what really happened the day before she died, though the context was never explained. More disturbing still were the records she found from the years that followed. The house had changed hands 17 times since 1934. Most families stayed less than a year. The few who lasted longer all reported similar phenomena: voices of children, especially young girls, coming from empty rooms, objects moving on their own, sudden temperature drops in specific areas of the house, particularly the main staircase and the second-floor bedroom that had been Lucy's. When Rachel returned home that night, she found Mira sitting rigidly on the living room couch, staring at the staircase with an expression of pure terror. Her daughter's lips were moving silently, as if speaking to someone invisible. "Mira?" Rachel called, cautious. "Honey, what's wrong?" Mira turned toward her mother, but her eyes seemed unfocused, looking through Rachel rather than at her. When she spoke, her voice was strange, higher pitched than usual, with a cadence that made Rachel's skin crawl. "She's angry, Mummy. She's so very angry. She says the boy never got punished for pushing her. She says it's not fair he got to grow up and she didn't. She says..." Mira's voice trailed off, and her eyes suddenly snapped into focus. "Mom, when did you get home? I was just sitting here and then..." But Rachel was no longer listening to her daughter's confused questions. She was staring at the staircase where, for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw the faint outline of a small figure in a 1930s dress standing on the landing. watching them with eyes full of decades-old rage. The manifestations became more aggressive after that night. Mira began speaking in Lucy's voice more frequently, always when she thought her mother wasn't listening. Rachel would catch fragments of conversations, angry rants about fairness, about punishment, about how the boy had lived his whole life while she remained trapped. But it was the physical changes in Mira that terrified Rachel most. Her daughter had begun losing weight rapidly, her cheeks becoming hollow and her eyes taking on a sunken appearance. Dark circles surrounded them, as if she hadn't slept in weeks, though Rachel checked on her every night and found her apparently sleeping peacefully. Dr. Martinez, the family physician, was baffled by Mira's sudden decline. Blood tests showed nothing abnormal. Her vitals were stable, but the girl seemed to be fading away, as if something was slowly draining the life from her. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening. Rachel was preparing dinner when she heard a commotion upstairs. Racing to Mira's room, she found her daughter standing at the window, one foot already on the sill. Mira's eyes were vacant, and when she spoke, it was in that high, childish voice that had become horribly familiar. "If I can't grow up, then she can't either. It's only fair. She understands now, don't she, sweetie?" Rachel lunged forward, grabbing Mira around the waist just as her daughter started to lean toward the open window. The fall would have been fatal, a 3-story drop onto the concrete walkway below. "Mira, stop!" Rachel screamed, fighting to pull her daughter back into the room. But Mira fought against her with supernatural strength, her small frame somehow generating enormous force. Her face was twisted into an expression of rage that didn't belong on a 14-year-old's features. When she spoke again, her voice was layered, both Mira's teenage tones and Lucy's childish pitch intermingling in a horrifying harmony. "She pushed me, he pushed me, and nobody cared. Nobody punished him. It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair!" The windows throughout the house began rattling in their frames. Books flew off shelves and the lights flickered wildly. Rachel could feel the temperature plummeting as frost began forming on the glass. Then, suddenly, Mira collapsed. The supernatural strength left her all at once, and she crumpled to the floor like a rag doll. The house fell silent except for the sound of both mother and daughter gasping for breath. When Mira looked up at her mother, her eyes were her own again, filled with confusion and terror. "Mom, what happened? Why are we in my room? I thought we were downstairs." Rachel knew they couldn't stay in the house another night. After the window incident, she packed their essential belongings while Mira slept fitfully on the couch, muttering incomprehensible words in her sleep. But as Rachel carried the last suitcase to the car, she found the front door wouldn't open. The deadbolt turned freely. The chain was unlatched, but an invisible force held the door as firmly as if it were welded shut. Rachel threw her shoulder against it repeatedly, panic rising in her chest. They were trapped. "She won't let us leave," came Mira's voice from behind her, but it wasn't quite her daughter's voice anymore. There was an echo to it, as if two people were speaking in unison. "Lucy says we can't go until she gets what she wants." Rachel spun around to find Mira standing at the base of the staircase, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her daughter's eyes had taken on a glassy, vacant expression, and when she smiled, it was with a child's innocent cruelty. "What does she want?" Rachel whispered, though she dreaded the answer. "Justice," Mira replied, beginning to climb the stairs backward, her unseeing eyes never leaving her mother's face. "She wants the boy who pushed her to pay, but he's old now, maybe dead, so she'll take what she can get." Each step Mira took backward up the staircase was impossible. No human being could walk upstairs that way without looking, yet she moved with perfect confidence. Her feet found each step precisely, as if she were being guided by invisible hands. "She wants a replacement," Mira continued, her voice growing fainter as she reached the second-floor landing. "A girl, the same age she was when she died. A girl who can stay with her forever and ever and ever." Rachel realized with mounting horror that Lucy wasn't trying to hurt Mira out of random malevolence. The spirit had been searching for decades, driving away family after family, waiting for the right victim. A lonely teenage girl, isolated and vulnerable. Someone Lucy could claim as her eternal companion in whatever twisted afterlife she inhabited. "Mira! Fight her!" Rachel screamed, racing up the stairs. "She's not your friend! She wants to kill you!" But when Rachel reached the landing, Mira was gone. Every door on the second floor stood open except one. The door to what had once been Lucy's bedroom. From behind it came the sound of children and playing as if a party was happening inside. Rachel grabbed the handle and found it unlocked. She threw the door open and gasped at what she saw inside. The room had transformed completely. Gone were Mira's teenage belongings, replaced by 1930s furniture and toys. Old-fashioned dolls sat in a perfect circle on a braided rug, and in the centre sat Mira, but she looked different, younger somehow. Her clothes changed to a simple dress that matched the period. Across from Mira sat another girl, translucent and flickering like a candle flame, but unmistakably real. Lucy Cleary looked exactly as she had the day she died, 7 years old, with dark ringlets and a blue dress. But her eyes held decades of accumulated rage and loneliness. "We're going to be best friends forever," Lucy said to Mira in a sing-song voice. "Just like I always wanted." Rachel rushed into the room, but the moment she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her. The brass handle vanished completely, leaving only smooth wood where it had been. She was trapped in Lucy's twisted recreation of her childhood bedroom. "Mummy, look!" Mira exclaimed in a voice that was disturbingly cheerful. "Lucy taught me how to play her favourite game. It's called Forever Friends, and once you start, you never have to stop." The translucent girl turned her pale eyes toward Rachel, and when Lucy smiled, her teeth appeared too sharp, too numerous for a 7-year-old's mouth. "Mrs. Johnson doesn't understand our game yet," Lucy said with that eerie sing-song cadence. "But she will. They always do. Eventually." Rachel noticed with growing dread that Mira was becoming more translucent with each passing moment, while Lucy appeared to be growing more solid. The spirit was somehow draining Mira's life force, using it to strengthen her own presence in the physical world. "Let her go," Rachel demanded, stepping toward the circle of dolls. "Take me instead." Lucy laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. "Oh, but you're much too old, Mrs. Johnson. My brother was older too, and look how that turned out for me. No, no, no. I need someone young, someone who can stay and play with me forever and ever." The dolls around them began to move, their porcelain heads turning in unison to stare at Rachel with glassy eyes. Some had their necks twisted at impossible angles, their beautiful faces cracked and stained. Rachel realized with horror that these weren't just toys. They were representations of all the girls Lucy had tried to claim over the decades, the ones who had escaped before the transformation was complete. "You see, Lucy continued, rising to her feet with movements that defied gravity. I've been so very lonely. 89 years is a long time to wait for a proper playmate. The other families, they always left too soon. Their daughters were almost ready to join me, but then the grown-ups would take them away. As Lucy spoke, the room continued to shift and change around them. The walls aged and rotted before Rachel's eyes, revealing the house as it truly was. A decaying monument to a child's eternal rage. The cheerful 1930s decorations became mouldy and moth-eaten, and the sweet scent of childhood was replaced by the musty smell of death and stagnation. But Mira is special, Lucy went on, her form now solid enough to cast a shadow. She's already so sad, so lonely. It won't hurt nearly as much when she lets go of life. She wants to stay with me. Don't you, sweetie? Mira nodded dreamily, her own form now barely visible. We're going to have tea parties every day and play dress-up, and Lucy promised to teach me how to float like she does. Rachel realised that conventional methods wouldn't work here. Lucy had been manipulating this space for nearly 9 decades, and she was too powerful in her own domain. But there was one thing the spirit craved more than anything else: justice for her murder. I know what really happened to you, Lucy, Rachel said, her voice carrying across the rotting room. I know about your brother. I know he pushed you. The temperature in the room plummeted, and Lucy's form flickered with rage. He killed me! Ah! She shrieked, her child's voice distorting into something inhuman. And nobody cared! Nobody punished him! You're right, thoughtful Rachel said carefully. It wasn't fair. But taking Mira won't change what happened to you. It won't bring you justice. Lucy's rage filled the room like a physical presence, and the walls began to bleed. Dark, viscous liquid seeping from the rotting wallpaper, pooling on the floor around their feet. The dolls' eyes began to weep the same substance, their porcelain faces cracking further with each tear. Justice? Lucy snarled, her form shifting between that of an innocent 7-year-old and something far more sinister. What justice? My brother lived to be 83 years old. He had children, grandchildren, a whole life that should have been mine. Rachel pressed on, knowing she was walking a dangerous line. But what's his name, Lucy? Do you even remember what your brother was called? The question seemed to stop Lucy cold. Her form flickered uncertainly, and for the first time since entering the room, Mira stirred slightly, as if part of her consciousness was returning. His name was, Lucy began, then faltered. He was the boy who pushed me, the bad boy who... You don't remember, do you? Rachel said softly. You've been angry for so long that you've forgotten who you're actually angry at. Thomas. His name was Thomas Cleary, and he died of pneumonia in 1952. He's been dead for over 70 years, Lucy. The bleeding walls began to slow their terrible weeping, and some of the dolls stopped their synchronized staring. Lucy's form became less solid, more confused. No, she whispered. No, he's still out there. He's still being punished for what you did to me. He has to pay. He truly regretted it, Rachel continued, her voice steady and warm. I found old letters, Lucy. Your brother never forgot what happened. He spent his life trying to make peace with it. He never started a family. He lived quietly, thinking about you every day. And when his time came, your name was the last thing he spoke. The change in the room was instant. The 1930s setting faded, not into Mira's bedroom, but into something soft and timeless. A gentle, golden light surrounded everything, calm and comforting. Lucy too was changing. The heavy weight she had carried for so long began to lift, revealing the scared, confused child she once was. He said my name, she asked, her voice light, no longer angry. "Yes," Rachel nodded. "It's in the nurse's notes." His final words were, "I'm sorry, Lucy. I'm so sorry." For 65 years, he wanted to say that to you. Mira's body regained clarity, her expression calm. Lucy's energy had loosened, her presence becoming peaceful. "But I held on to all that pain," Lucy whispered, tears shimmering. "I thought I had to make others feel it too." "I know," Rachel said softly, "but you've suffered long enough. Your brother found peace. You can too if you're ready." The golden glow brightened. Within it, Rachel saw a figure take shape, a boy, head lowered gently. "Lucy," came a voice, soft and rustling like wind through leaves. "Can we start again?" The spirit of Thomas Cleary materialized more clearly in the golden light, revealing a boy of perhaps 10 years old, dressed in clothes from the 1930s. His face was etched with eternal sorrow, and his eyes held the weight of decades of guilt and regret. Lucy stared at her brother's spirit, and for a long moment the room held its breath. The accumulated rage and bitterness that had sustained her for nearly 9 decades wavered like a candle flame in the wind. "Tommy," she whispered, using the childhood nickname she hadn't spoken in 89 years. "Is it really you?" "I've been trying to reach you for so long," Thomas said, his voice carrying the hollow echo of the grave. "But your anger, it was like a wall I couldn't break through. I've been waiting, Lucy, waiting to tell you how sorry I am." The transformation in Lucy was profound. The malevolent spirit that had terrorized families for decades began to fade away, leaving behind the scared little girl she had been. Her translucent form flickered between the twisted creature of rage she had become and the innocent child she had died as. "I didn't mean to push you so hard," Thomas continued, taking a step closer to his sister. "We were just arguing about that stupid toy, and I got angry, and I pushed you away from me. I never meant for you to fall down the stairs. I never meant for you to die." Mira was now fully solid again, sitting among the dolls but no longer trapped by Lucy's power. She watched the reunion with wonder and fear, understanding instinctively that she was witnessing something sacred and terrible. "I was so scared after you fell," Thomas went on, tears of ectoplasm streaming down his ghostly cheeks. "I was just a scared little boy who had done something horrible. When Mama and Papa said we couldn't tell anyone the truth, I was relieved. But the relief turned to guilt, and the guilt never went away." Lucy looked at her brother with new eyes, seeing not the monster she had imagined for decades, but the frightened child he had been. "You were scared too," she said, her voice soft with wonder. "All this time, I thought you didn't care. I thought you were glad I was gone." "Never," Thomas said firmly. "Not for a single day. I talked to your picture every night before bed. I left flowers on your grave every birthday until I got too old to walk there myself. I named my first bicycle Lucy, and my baseball glove, and my favourite teddy bear. Everything important in my life, I named after you." The golden light around them began to pulse gently, and Rachel felt a profound sense of peace settling over the room. The dolls had returned to normal porcelain figurines, their twisted features smoothed back into innocent expressions. The bleeding walls had healed themselves, and the oppressive atmosphere of decades of trapped anger was lifting like morning fog. "I forgive you, Tommy," Lucy said, her form beginning to shimmer and fade. "I forgive you, and I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I was so angry for so long. I'm sorry I tried to hurt those other children." "We were just children ourselves," Thomas replied, reaching out his hand toward his sister. We didn't know how to handle something so big and scary, but we can let it go now, can't we? Lucy nodded, and as she did, her form began to dissolve into points of light. "Will you come with me?" she asked. "I don't want to be alone anymore." "I've been waiting for you to ask," Thomas said with a smile that radiated love and relief. "I've been waiting so long." The two spirits began to fade together, their forms dissolving into streams of golden light that intertwined like dancers in an eternal waltz. As they disappeared, the oppressive weight that had pressed down on the house for nearly 9 decades lifted completely, leaving behind only peace and the faint scent of spring flowers. The room returned to its normal state. Mira's teenage bedroom with her books, her art supplies, her modern furniture. The dolls were gone, the bloodstains had vanished, and the temperature had returned to a comfortable warmth. It was as if the supernatural events had never happened, except for the profound sense of resolution that filled the air. Mira blinked and looked around in confusion. "Mum, what are we doing in my room? I thought we were downstairs eating dinner." She seemed to have no memory of the possession, of Lucy's influence, or of the terrifying hours they had just endured. Rachel decided it was better that way. Some experiences were too traumatic for a 14-year-old to carry, and perhaps forgetting was Lucy's final gift to the girl she had nearly claimed. "We came up to check something," Rachel said, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. "But it's all taken care of now." Over the following weeks, the house felt different, lighter, warmer, filled with an atmosphere of contentment rather than dread. The unexplained cold spots disappeared, the cabinet doors stayed closed, and the sense of being watched faded away completely. Mrs. Thompson visited a few days later, bringing fresh cookies and wearing an expression of profound relief. "The feeling is gone," she said simply. "After all these years, the sadness in that house is finally gone." "What did you do?" "I helped 2 children find their way home," Rachel replied. The elderly woman nodded knowingly. "Lucy and her brother. I always suspected there were 2 spirits in that house, not just one. The boy was gentler, sadder. He never wanted to hurt anyone. He was just trying to reach his sister." Rachel learned later that night, after researching old cemetery records, that Thomas Cleary's grave had been found open that morning, his headstone cracked down the middle. The groundskeeper couldn't explain it, but Rachel understood. Thomas had finally been able to let go of the earthly guilt that had anchored him to the mortal world. As for the house itself, it felt like a home for the first time in decades. Mira's nightmares stopped, her appetite returned, and the colour came back to her cheeks. She had no conscious memory of Lucy, but she sometimes mentioned dreams about playing with a little girl who had become her friend, dreams that ended with the girl saying goodbye and walking into a bright light with her brother. Rachel kept the truth to herself, but sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would pause at the foot of the main staircase and whisper a quiet "thank you" to the empty air. She never received a response, but she didn't need one. The peace in the house was answer enough. The Cleary children had found their rest at last, and in doing so, they had given peace not just to themselves, but to everyone who would live in their childhood home in the years to come.